Hello everybody, we're here talking about Plato Book 7 today. There are three main themes we need to take away from this. The first is the story of the allegory of the cave. The second is how that relates to Plato's general metaphysical scheme, which he's outlined in Book 6, which we've skipped over for time purposes. And we have the dialectical process Plato's going to talk about. The first one is the allegory of the cave. This will bring together both his process of understanding, which is the dialectics, and his metaphysical scheme. Let's talk with this diagram we're looking at here, with me right now on the screen. In the picture we have these prisoners chained to a wall. Behind them we have a wall and a fire. Now, there's a walkway between the fire and the wall, and across this you have people carrying various objects like pots and chairs and whatnot above their head. And these will then create forms or shadows on the wall, that these prisoners will look at. Now these prisoners will spend their lives being chained where they are, looking at these shadows, thinking they've seen reality, and making up theories and trying to comprehend, the images they see upon, the effective screen. You can think about it watching a big TV is a way to think about it, trapped underground, watching a big TV, and thinking everything you see on TV is the actual reality, And Plato says, imagine one of these prisoners one day gets free, turns around, kind of realizes his settings, and decides that he's going to take the path out, walks out, and gets out to the real world, where you see the trees, the shrubs, the houses, the actual, structures that make up reality as we understand it. Now, anybody going from such a dark environment to such a well-lit environment, is going to have difficulty at first seeing things. It'll be hard to comprehend what you're seeing. It's going to hurt. And it takes a while to adjust to seeing things outside the cave. But after that adjustment's made, a period of time, then you can start realizing what makes, the entire, visible world possible, and that is the sun. And the sun then is the source, of everything else. Now Plato says this structure represents how most people actually spend their lives. Most of us are trapped in that cave, trying to come up with our various ideas about explaining the perceptions that we call reality. Where in point of fact, beneath reality, there are deep set patterns. And these are the realities Plato thinks are the outside world. So the outside world represents the true and real world, the world of perceptions, the world we're trapped in, most of us are trapped in most of our lives, is the world of the cave and the shadows on the wall, So philosophy is the process of freeing yourself, from those shackles and coming to see things as they really are. Now, the Japanese build this basic distinction into their language, So it's tatame is for perceived reality, and hone is for true reality or real reality, the reality behind things. And that's what Plato's talking about. Now for Plato, you have these patterns that go on over time, You'll have, we've had horses on this planet for 10, 20,000 years, but not one horse has lived 10, 20,000 years. What is continuing through time? What Plato's going to say is the reason why all these horses have been here 20,000 years, 10, 20,000 years, is because they all participate in the pattern, what we call DNA, he's called the form, of the horse. That continues right through time, even though it does not exist in space, So you're talking about temporal entities that have influence over the spatial temporal world, So things in space and time, are subject to these patterns and forms, that go up to then compose what we try to study. Indeed, the university, what we're doing here is basically Plato's basic project of trying to figure out which of these words we use, in reference, actually refer to real patterns, and which of our words we're using are actually things like unicorns, fictions and falsehoods that are left over from our days in the cave. So we try to pierce through this, and behind this whole thing, the sun represents, Plato's idea that the world is basically life is good, universe is good, existence is good. So you have this unconscious, unthinking source of reality, and think of it like a candle. And the candle and the source, you have what kind of illuminates everything. The farther you move away from the candle, the less light there is. For Plato, that's kind of like the rest of reality, The candle is the form of the good. And as we move away, we have less of the good, but everything is still basically good, This is the reality Plato thinks we exist in, and explains how he explains his moral philosophy as well. So in this sense, because there is a thing that is good, it is unknowing, It's unthinking, it's unconscious, but it's all good, as it were, all creative. And an emanation, from this thing, like light goes out, it's all of creativity, which is all fundamentally good, Plato thinks this gives a basis of objectivity, for moral judgments, to put them in direct contrast to the sophists. The sophists are trying to find a way to distinguish between the laws of nature and the laws of the state. Remember, antiphon, right, back from Cornford 2, Cornford Book 2, right? Now here's a third option. The laws of nature for Plato include moral laws, right? Now, this is not that different from Christianity. Indeed, if you make the form of the good conscious and interactive, right, you have effectively a Christian God. Right, Plato does not think it's conscious or interactive. You can't talk to it or pray to it. And nonetheless, the universe is good and follows, right, that basic pattern. But from that come all these other patterns. And when they finally interface with matter, then create the various things we see in the world today. Right, so the prisoner, right, in the cave, shadows on the wall, is just seeing the surface of things, right? When you get outside the cave, you start to see the deeper patterns that underlie everything. And that's what we want to study and understand, folks. The more you capture these things, right, the more in position you are to influence your environment, right, the way you want it to be. If you think diseases are sent by the gods, right, you're likely to sacrifice, as they did in open parts of the Iliad, right, a bunch of oxen to Apollo, instead of draining the swamp of mosquitoes which spread the disease. So understanding the patterns and why they influence and how they influence, right, is critical to interfacing, right, with our environment and others. Because people have patterns as well. There are patterns of psychology, so on and so forth. Which of these are worth studying? That becomes the questions we debate in the academy. And in the process, now Plato hasn't worked this out, right? It's called epistemology in modern contemporary philosophy. We'll talk about that in the next series of lectures when we get to David Hume, right, and some thoughts on thinking, right? But he hasn't really worked this out, but he's got a process, he thinks, by which we come to move, right, from this world of perception, this world of shadows on the wall, to a world of the forms. And this is the process he calls dialectics. It's a process of looking, starting with a question, and providing an answer, and then seeing if that answer is adequate or not. And we looked at this process being applied, right, in Book 1, Republic, when Polemarchus proposed the definition of justice, right, as his father proposed, as telling the truth and paying one's debt, right? And Plato then exposes this to a number of critiques, or the madman and his weapons, and that definition is found to be inadequate. And that's the process dialectics in complete operation there, right? You have a concept being proposed and described, set of concepts being proposed, definition proposed to explain the concept of justice. Or examples are found to show that concept is not, the definition is not correct. So then move on to a new formulation, good to friends and evil to foes. And the process there, through Book 1, we start seeing justice's interest of the strongest. Plato using dialectics to dissect and show that this is not correct. Right, so dialectics is the process of finding the first principles, the rules that the patterns that underlie reality through a process of cognitive analysis, right? And this is what is going to term philosophy. Now, this process we worked out into abductive, deductive, right, and inductive logic, right, given names and develop further. We get to Aristotle and whatnot. But for Plato, that's what he's talking about, a dialectics. It's a process of looking at definitions and seeing if they actually fit the world or if they do not fit the world. If they do not fit the world, the definitions need to be revised. And hopefully through this process, we'll eventually come up with a set of definitions, right, that are accurate, right, and help us understand interface with things. Right, so this is accumulation. Here we're seeing, right, as it were, Plato's metaphysics that underlie his ethical theory and his political theory. Right, remember, right, and this is also his definition of wisdom. We promised to find wisdom, right, after we finished Book 4, we never got back to it. Plato's definition of wisdom is understanding this series of forms, right, understanding the form of the good and all the forms all the way down. Right, anybody in that kind of position would indeed be wise, right? They understand what it is to be just and decent. They understand ethics and morality, right? They also understand the other rules about how to govern, right, how to run human societies, because they understand the patterns, right, that cover these kind of concerns, right? So that's what he's got in mind by wisdom. It's this overarching, complete understanding of how things function, right? So indeed, with that, and courage and temperance, it's hard not to see how it'd be difficult not be difficult at all to be just, right? It's what you need to be just. You know what is good, right? Have the discipline to do it, and then have the self-restraint to make sure that you don't get drunk and miss the opportunity, right? So folks, what you've got here is a completion of the whole structure. And this is what we mean by a complete philosophy, right? We looked at atomism back in chapter 1 of Cornford, right? They tried to decide everything just in terms of atoms, moving and bouncing back and forth. Plato is now outlaid in complete metaphysics, right, and laid on top of that in ethics and then a political theory, right, and epistemology to some degree if we accept dialectics. That has to be revised and reformulated, and it is. What we see in philosophy, that continuous process, set ideas put in motion by one thinker that are then revised by future thinkers.